There's someone in this planet who has extrasensory perception. They can perceive things that are outside the range of not only human like vision and hearing, but also outside the range of most scientific instruments. You'd have to have very specialized instruments that don't currently exist in order to see what this person sees, right? Mm-hmm. So they have this very extrasensory perception. And let's just say that they happen to be able to, as a result of this, perceive what we would consider to be the spiritual realm. And they're able to perceive of spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call this, some sort of beings that exist in a part of reality that no one else on the entire planet can perceive. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So here's the first part of the experiment. So now what's going to happen to this person, right, who's able to perceive all these things that no one else can perceive exist? My proposal to you is that they are going to be seen as someone who's, let's just say, not sane, mm-hmm. and they'll probably put it in an institution of some sort.
Right.
And there's very low likelihood that there'll be any scientific experiments conducted as to whether this person's claims are actually real or not. Do you agree with that?
Well, this sounds a lot like something I went through.
Okay. Do you want to tell the story, or are you not comfortable with that?
I actually think this is a perfect platform to do so. So I'll give you a little bit of a rundown. So
okay.
And by the way, I just want to preface what I'm about to say in that I'm actually not the only one who has perceived things this way. I think I mentioned in our last podcast, I mentioned Dr. Carl Jung in the 30s or 40s when he was mm-hmm. interviewing a schizophrenic patient who was using all of this terminology to deal with the sun. And then 4 years after that happened, an anthropologist was publishing these stories from Germanic tribes, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And the words in those stories matched up almost perfectly word for word with what the patient was like gabbing about.
Yeah, I remember that.
So a little bit of synchronous, and I've had many experiences like that myself, and I mentioned that in the last podcast. So this is actually where I think it ties in very much to what's going on in the world today, because I think one way that you can certainly alter how the senses that you already have are functioning are with substances, mm-hmm. psychedelic substances, right? I think that's, and to your point of how that relates to a spiritual experience, those entheogens, I think is what they're called, but I could be mistaken. Those actually constitute a sort of spiritual awakening in mm-hmm. a lot of people, or a spiritual experience. Ayahuasca, for example, a lot of people report talking to machine elves, for example.
Right.
And I have no idea what a machine elf is. I have no concept of what that is. An elf is something that's only heard in fantasy, and machines, I mean, obviously we know what machines are, but it makes me think of robotic fantasy creatures. I have no concept of what that is. If someone tells that to me, I have no grounding concept with which to relate that to. So naturally, I will think that it's insane. And I think anyone else who hasn't experienced it would. But mm-hmm. I will actually go out on a limb here and say that it's entirely rare, if not impossible, for somebody to have perceived something, even if they think they're seeing something new that no one else has experienced. I think it's almost impossible that happens in a sort of solipsistic, it's like a one-time thing. It's like the singularity. It's the only time it's happened.
Yeah. I mean, this is very extreme just for the purposes of this experiment.
Right. I'm kind of going into my own self-narrative here, so I have to be careful. I have to keep it grounded in the context of what you asked.
Okay.
I think that, I think it's entirely possible for someone to be crazy. I'm going to defer, actually, we were talking about the atheist and the psychologist last time. I'm just going to say the name, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson actually was talking in classes about shamans, actually, and about what role they served in a lot of these indigenous societies. Mm-hmm. And in many times, the youth in whatever culture or tribe existed would kind of have these spontaneous tendencies. They would maybe play by themselves. They wouldn't really socialize with other kids, but they'd be very drawn to, like, they'd have dreams. They'd have dreams of the future. They'd have dreams that the culture and the other elders realized, oh, I've had these dreams before too, or the other shamans have had these dreams too. Mm-hmm. So the thing that's scary, though, that Peterson mentions is that when you see people who are schizophrenic, who are institutionalized, and, they're obviously feeling some sort of energy. And I've seen these kinds of people. There's two types of people. There's the tethered crazies and the untethered crazies.
Can you explain the difference? I don't think I know.
So like an untethered person is like, they're completely a slave to there's no other way to put it, but the energies that are around them, like the homeless people that you see on the street who are like saying random things to you, like, it's almost like they're so focused on taking in the energy around them that they don't have anything left for themselves. They have no actual ego or identity. Their ego has completely disintegrated. So they're completely almost dead in a way, even though they're still alive. Their consciousness has been completely removed of its own personal identity. Those people are untethered.
Oh man, there's so many like rabbit holes I could go down with that in terms of like psychological zombies and stuff like that. But I'm gonna leave that aside for right now.
Non-player characters, basically.
Yeah, in terms of like, you know, what's going on in their heads. But yeah.
Anyway, and then the tethered people, and this kind of is in line with my most recent experiences, where they go to that place where they're feeling the energies in a different way, they're perceiving reality in a different way. They're purposefully going there, but they're able to bring back some sort of message in the form of a language or a symbol or a sign that has meaning to people who haven't gone on that journey with them. And that's, I think, the real essence is, it doesn't matter what you perceive, it matters what you communicate.
Okay, so back to the thought experiment. Regardless of how you communicate what you've experienced, what do you, I guess, so one way I think you could communicate it that might be perceived differently is if you give it sort of a religious context. If I had a religious experience, maybe that's more acceptable in some circumstances rather than saying I saw a ghost. Is that what you're trying to get at here? Is there a different way of communicating it?
Well, I think paranormal and religious phenomena kind of get lumped into the same category as being metaphysical and sort of non-scientific, to kind of do a callback to your first question, Kins.
But here's the problem with it though. So this experience can happen while you're in the presence of other people, and you can be seeing something that no one else is actually seeing. Generally, when you give that no matter how you communicate that, you're going to generally be seen as someone who's not got it all together, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that actually just highlights how the term crazy, or the concept of insanity, is really just the concept of someone who's openly communicating that they're not perceiving the same thing. So it's, like I said, it's all based on communication, right? If I was perceiving like the ghost of a knight over your left shoulder right now, which I'm not, but for the purpose of argument, let's say that
I was kind of hoping you're going to share something with me right now.
He's a nice guy. He's just here for the podcast.
Okay.
If I was to see that but not communicate it to you, would I still be crazy?
Okay. So now I get what you're saying. So they can be perceiving things, but they could have like a filter in their own mind that's either like sort of like saying I'm not, that's just a hallucination, or at least I'm not going to share that because people will think I'm crazy.
Right. Well, let's think about this, right? Isn't it kind of, it's all about the intent of what it is. Like, I'm looking at the room that we're in right now. I see vents, I see a door, I see multiple doors, I see a cabinet, I see a refrigerator, I see the chair you're sitting in, I see all of these things.
Yeah.
It would be crazy for me to articulate and communicate to you everything that I'm perceiving in this room. You might look at me and be like, will this guy ever shut up? Why is he talking about my room? We're trying to do a podcast here, It is a matter not just of perception, but filtering. And people who have autism and Asperger's too, they actually have an acute awareness to their surroundings, right? So for the purpose of argument, let's say that someone with a very severe case of autism lived in this room. If I moved that chair that's behind you over there, they wouldn't perceive this room as the same room with that chair being moved. They would perceive the entire environment as being completely different and shifted, because where that chair is in relation to everything else affects everything else. So that's an example of they're seeing the same things as we are, but they're processing it and conceptualizing it differently.
Right.
Even though they're not hallucinating, like there's in psychological terms, there's a positive symptom, which is where there's something added to your experience, and there's a negative symptom. So, having a negative symptom would be like depression, but like a positive symptom would be like mania. And I don't mean it like good and bad. I mean like something's there versus something's not there.
Okay, point well taken. But let's just say the person in this thought experiment is voicing they have no filter. They're just voicing all they're seeing to people around them, and they're basically seeing them as insane. So the next part of the question I have is that person wrong, and are the other people right? Because there are many more that don't perceive it than do.
Okay. So I'm drawing on my own experience, because it's almost hard. Did you listen to my story and ask the questions these ways? But I think it's so important. I did that. So I was living at home with my parents, and I was smoking a lot of cannabis, and I started to see things and perceive things that maybe weren't there. Well, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they weren't there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can't verify at this point, so we could go either way with this, right?
Right. And, I started to see like shadows in the corner of my eye, which is actually a very common phenomenon in people who have bipolar, and smoking cannabis actually induces bipolar. But anyways, they were very scared because they didn't understand the reason for why I was telling them these things.
Right.
It's not just what you're communicating, it's the intent behind it. If you say, for example, I spoke to a ghost, and you focus on just the novelty of that, and you get obsessed with it to the point where it's like you think there's another realm and you try to escape to that realm.
Yeah.
Is mental illness. But if you see a ghost who's telling you something that's maybe turns out to be meaningful, like it could be something really innocuous, like stop playing video games too much.
Right.
I've actually done active imagination experiments, which is where you try and talk to your subconscious as if it's a separate entity and ask it questions. And some of the answers I get are things like, make your bed stupid.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far down.
Anyway,
I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. But I just want to share a quick anecdote that I've heard of an interesting technique of building up like a council of elders in your mind, where you pick like historical figures who you want to be your advisors, and you study them enough that you can sort of imagine them in your head, and then you basically you have conversations with them in your mind so that you can sort of better inform your decisions. I thought that was an interesting idea.
I actually do that. I do that when I'm writing. Like I'll do things like I'll ask usually people who are dead, because it's like I feel like feels like you're communicating with the dead a little bit. But like Dr. Carl Jung, for example, I'll talk with him, or so many other people. I think one time I even tried to ask Marx what he thought of everything going on. But we'll wait.
Yeah, we can talk about that later.
We can talk about that later. We're not going down that road. So I think that it's you can be perceiving something and communicating something without a filter. It's insane if it's something that doesn't benefit you and the people around you. Now, this can go both ways. In our current society, we don't have much respect. Well, it's kind of funny. Ironically, the way our culture is right now is we actually tend to give a lot of respect at face value towards everyone's own individual subjective experience, right?
Yeah, well...
But at the cost of a sort of cohesiveness.
I mean, the problem there is that not everyone has the same experience, though. So how can you give everyone equal respect, right?
That's the problem.
Yeah, it's like an intractable problem.
Right. And I've actually thought about this a lot, about the person I used to be. Let's just say I used to be on a completely opposite end of an ideological, philosophical perspective.
Oh, I've gone all over the spectrum myself.
Yeah, and it just, by the way, side note, it makes me think of a joke. People always talk about gender identity. It's like, did you just assume my political affiliation? Anyway,
yeah.
So this gets to actually something that really underlies postmodernism, which is, is there any objective truth if everyone has a slightly different perception? But even if you have the same perceptions, everyone has a different starting point. It's like there's 7 billion notes in a musical scale, and they're all starting at different times.
I don't even think we all have the same perceptions. I think some people might share similar sensations, but I have doubts about whether we all perceive them the same.
Right. Well, I bet our ears are even tuned slightly differently. You might hear certain overtones in music that I don't hear.
Right, because I think everyone's unique experiences necessarily has caused them to fine-tune like the filtering and the perception mechanism differently. I don't think there's a way for everyone to have exactly the same, or even two people to have exactly the same experience.
Right.